Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to this Commander deck tech. In this video we're going to be looking at one of the funnest commanders coming out of Jumpstart 2022, Preston the Vanisher. Preston is 3 and a white for a 2/5 legendary creature Rabbit Wizard. It has, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't cast, create a token copy of that creature except it's a 0/1 white illusion. It also has, pay 1 and a white and sacrifice 5 illusions to exile target non-land permanent. So, Preston is a really fun commander with a very interesting ability. Basically, it rewards us for getting non-token creatures onto the battlefield without casting them. The reward is that we get a token copy of that creature that we brought in, although that token is just a 0/1. So, how can we make the most of this, as those 0/1 tokens aren't going to be beating down too much by themselves? What we want to do is to get our value off of those creatures when they come into the battlefield, and that means creatures with enter the battlefield effects, and lots of them. Do look out for these ETB effects in all sections of the deck. Secondly, we need to get creatures into play without casting them. Unfortunately, we have a method that does this while also letting us abuse those enter the battlefield effects that we already want to be running, and that is with blink effects. Blink effects remove a creature we control from the game and then bring it back into play at a later point, normally either straight away or at the end of the turn. The strategy for this deck will be pretty simple. Play creatures that have good enter the battlefield effects, then blink them so they come back into the battlefield again, making the enter the battlefield effects also go off one more time. Then with Preston out, we'll get another copy of that creature, so we'll get yet another one of those enter the battlefield effects. Those effects could be drawing us cards, or ramping us ahead, or even winning us the game. As we mainly only care about the enter the battlefield effects of these tokens that we're going to be making, they can sit there chump blocking for days, or we can sacrifice 5 of them to Preston for some great removal as well. One quick note about this video is that we will be going through all the individual sections that you need to make the deck yourself. We won't be giving a full deck list, rather a number of cards that you need in each section to make it work, and then a list of cards for you to pick from. Any card we mention will be down in the description below. Our first section is our actual blink effects. These are essential to the deck as it gets the whole thing up and running. Ideally, you'd want to run between 14 and 20 of these in the deck. First up, we have effects that can repeatedly blink creatures turn after turn. Some you have to pay mana for, like Distinguished Conjurer and Eldrazi Displacer. You then have Golden Argosy, which lets you blink every creature that crewed it, which, if it can survive combat, will let you do it again and again. Then you also have Teleportation Circle and Conjurer's Closet, which blink a creature at end step, turn after turn. Then we have creatures that themselves can blink other creatures when they enter the battlefield. What's great about these is that when these are blinked themselves by another effect, they will come back in, and we'll get a bonus token of them with Preston that will also blink something to lead to some very cool turns. Fun fact with Felidar Guardian and Restoration Angel is that if these two end up in play together, they can just repeatedly blink each other. The then unlimited token copies that Preston will make of these as they come into play can then blink anything else that you want, such as some card draw or some ramp. Also, importantly, because both of these are May abilities, you can stop when you want to so you don't ever just draw out the game. Felidar Guardian can also combo with our commander and just one other blink effect just by itself. It's a bit more involved to explain, so I'll put a link down to that in the description below. Another great option is Flickerwisp. While it doesn't go infinite, as the blink creature comes back at the end of turn rather than straight away, it is still just great value and a great include. After that, we then have some one-time blink effects. These aren't as good as the repeatable options, but if I'm honest, there's just a lot more of them, and we do need enough of these effects to make the deck actually work. On the plus side, most of them are instant speed, so they can also be used to dodge targeted removal spells, which is a very nice bonus. You have cheap effects like Cloudshift and Ephemerate, which only blink one creature. Then you have some slightly more expensive options, like Eerie Interlude, which can flicker any number of creatures, so we could blink our whole board of non-token creatures to get all of those ETB effects all over again. And when we do, they'll basically all be doubled up with Preston in the form of the 0/1 copies that Preston makes. Moving over to our card draw now, and we're going to want to be running between at least 8 and 10 bits here to make sure the deck is always ticking over. First up, we have creatures that draw us a card when they enter the battlefield. These are everything that the deck wants to be doing, and just gives us so much opportunity to draw a bucket load of cards. I absolutely love them all in this deck. Just imagine all the blinking that we'll be doing, and all the token copies that will be coming in of these that also draw us cards. We then have Circuit Mender. This gains us some life when it enters the battlefield, and draws us a card when it leaves the battlefield. This could either be when it dies, or if we blink it. Next up, we have Welcoming Vampire and Tocasia's Welcome. These draw us cards once a turn if a small creature enters the battlefield under our control. In this deck, this is all but guaranteed, so are great options to keep our hand nice and full. Then because of all the tokens that we'll easily be making with Preston, Idol of Oblivion is another great way of getting an extra card a turn. And while not straight card draw, White Bloom Adventurer and Seasoned Dungeoneer ooze with the card advantage that they'll give us. These are fantastic cards to blink, as they and the tokens themselves will push us further into the dungeon and all the lovely effects that gives us. And then lastly, we have Skullclamp. I couldn't really not mention it, as it is a way of cashing in those 0/1 illusions into some Moorish cards. Next up is our ramp section, and like with the card draw, where possible we'll be looking at ways of getting value off of ETB effects. Also, like card draw, we'll need between at least 8 and 10 bits here. That brings us to these 4 great cards here. Knight of the White Orchid and Loyal Warhound will keep us up to speed with our ramping green opponents. And then Kor Cartographer and Solemn Simulacrum will push us on even further. Then as our engine, we have some mana rocks. These let us get the ball rolling, they'll actually cast Preston early, and they're just super solid ways of giving us extra reach early in the game. In a deck like this where we don't need any fixing, I'd want to keep them at less than 2 mana where possible. On the topic of being a monocoloured deck, we can take full advantage of this with cards like Extraplanar Lens and Caged Sun. These make our planes tap for double mana, which is great with all the card draw that we went through earlier. A note on Extraplanar Lens is that if you put a planes under it, everyone's planes will tap for 1 extra. But if you're sneaky and put a snow-covered planes under it, only people running snow-covered planes will get that effect. It's a very cool interaction, but it does come with the cost of having to run snow-covered planes. But if you did stock up over Cal time, it might be something to consider. Next up is our interaction section. This is something that white does not struggle with at all. First up, we have Palace Jailer. This removes a creature, while also introducing the monarchy into the game for some extra card advantage. If we do ever lose the monarchy, we can just flicker it and take the next best thing on the board with it. Then there is Skyclave Apparition and Duplicant, absolutely great at exiling the best creatures at the table. For some artifact and enchantment removal, we have Lauren of the Third Path. This white Rex Sage is absolutely perfect for the deck, and just gives us some extra answers that we need. Then we have Touch the Spirit Realm. This is both an Oblivion Ring and a Blink spell rolled into one, so we can use the most relevant mode whenever we need it. Next up, we have some of the best targeted removal going. White has it all with cards like Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Fateful Absence, and Generous Gift. White then also has some of the best board wipes going as well, with cards like Wrath of God and Day of Judgment always solid options. Then cards like Austere Command and Farewell are great versatile options for when we just need to get rid of a certain kind of something. Next up is a little bit of protection, just so we can make sure we can keep Preston around. First up we have Cosmic Intervention, absolutely perfect anti-board wipe tech and fantastic at saving everything apart from our tokens and bring them all back ready to trigger all over again. In a similar vein we also have Glorious Protector. Now this is really good to flash in, exile our own board and then eat a Wrath or block a particularly nasty creature, only to then die and then bring our whole board back again, ready to trigger all those ETB effects all over again. And then because it's basically free to run in this deck as it can just be a land when we need it, we have Sejiri's Shelter. It's a nice little instant that can use Protect Preston from any hate. Moving on, we can run a small package of Recursion. I'm a fan of running this anyway, but in this deck, recurring a creature into play will also trigger Preston's ability, which is super nice. First up, we have cards like Karmic Guide and the still really good Sun Titan. Great options at bringing back a value piece again and again. We then also have Savine's Reclamation and Ascend from Avernus. These are both fantastic at helping us rebuild if we do ever get wiped out from a Wrath effect, and really solid in the deck. Moving over to some dedicated win conditions, and we have some really strong options for us to go for. This is the section where you can go ham and run as many as you want. Firstly with Panharmonicon, and then the scary looking Elish Norn Mother of Machines. These really will turbocharge our deck to a new level, basically doubling up everything that we do. I also know there's already been some discourse about banning Elish Norn, so if you're watching this in a year or so's time, it might be worth checking if it's legal. Personally, I think it will be, but better to be safe than sorry. Another way of doubling things up is with Anointed Possession. Now this doubles up all the tokens that we'll make off of Preston, so we get even more of those lovely enter the battlefield effects. With all those creatures entering, a card like Cathar's Crusade will be just absurd. This will make all the creatures that we don't flicker, like our tokens for example, incredibly huge and a lethal threat in their own right. We then also have some more ways of actually making tokens, with Abdel Adrian and Reverent Hoplite. You will need to follow up with a blink effect or better yet a board wipe to really abuse Abdel, but I personally think it's a really fun option. And then in our mono white deck, our white devotion should be nice and high to make a killer board state off of Reverent Hoplite, especially if we blink it a couple of times. And then what goes great with any decent board state is a Chroma's Will. This is 2020's white overrun and is a fantastic way of finishing off a game. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, and we have a decent amount that we can run because our spells only need white mana to cast. For some colourless options, we have Endless Sands as an admittedly slow but still solid way of putting things back into play to trigger Preston. You then have Scavenger Grounds, which is great at nerfing any graveyard decks at the table. Then Terrain Generator is a really solid way of giving us a bit of extra ramp, and then War Room is just good at giving us some extra card draw. Then this could be a deck that has enough card draw to really get use out of Reliquary Tower, and it's giving us no maximum hand size. I'll be honest, white really has come a long way. For some lands that tap for white, we first have the Cycling lands. These are fantastic in this kind of deck at smoothing out our draws and always giving us something to do. We then have cards like Castle Ardenvale for some additional token making. You also have Aganjo Seat of the Empire, which is really solid removal that's free to run, as it's on a land. And then finally we have Emiria the Skyrune, which is a great card in need of a reprint. This can bring back a creature from our graveyard into play, which we'll also get a copy of because of Preston. So, thank you very much for watching. Do let us know down in the comments if there's any commanders you would like to see a deck tech on, and we'll have a look at them. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.